All right. I'd like to welcome you to Clergy Talk Podcast.
Well, I'm certainly thankful for the opportunity.
Definitely, if you would, please introduce yourself to my audience.
Well, I guess I've been a Christian for many years. I grew up in a dysfunctional home and poverty. And when I was off my first year at college, I got a scholarship. And when I went to my first year in college, I got to the point where Spirit of God had been working in my life for a long time, and I'd been literally running from God. I say literally running. Just one example would be I went to a Youth for Christ meeting in Seattle, which I had been participating in to satisfy my folks when I was younger. I had the Life of Christ movie at Easter time.
Right.
Sat up in the balcony, and as it got closer to the end of the movie, I knew what was coming. I knew there was an invitation, and I knew I was going to have to go forward.
Right.
I was running from God at that point in my life, and when I knew that invitation was coming, I literally went out the side door of the balcony, down a metal fire escape, and had to jump to the sidewalk at the bottom and took off because I was not about to give in to God.
Okay.
So I was running from God for a long time, actually. And eventually one night I just went outside at night, looked up into the stars, and asked Christ to come into my heart. The Spirit of God had gotten a hold of me. So from there, it's been one wonderful journey. I had not without problems, but God's been so gracious and merciful to me. And since then, I've had many years of leading midweek Bible studies, teaching, some preaching, seminars, and more recently writing books. In fact, in my military days, Vietnam era, I started a Christian Servicemen's Home with two other soldiers. We started a Christian Servicemen's Home at Fort Benning, Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. And my wife and I were down there 5 years ago. It's still running.
Wow, that's a blessing.
But in Vietnam era, we were winning soldiers to Christ daily. Guys heading off to Vietnam, they knew they might not be on earth long. So God used me in different ways over the years. So I'm very thankful for that. Great mercies.
That part of Vietnam I didn't really know about because I was 15 in 1975, so you figure the war was about over back then, and I just would sit down and listen to people talk sometimes, but nobody never said how many people came to Christ during that time period. So I can imagine that being true. Yes, because I remember when I went to Desert Storm, right before we got the mission that we're going to go deep in the territory, me and a couple of my friends started talking about Christ. Next thing you know, we had about 15, 20 people grouped together in one little bunch, just praising the Lord and sharing their testimony. So that's the power of God right there.
Isn't that great?
That was wonderful. That was every time I think about that story or that event, I just get chills all down my body.
Well, it's amazing what God does with broken vessels.
Yes.
When I got into the military, actually, I've been through a very difficult period of time, which I don't need to go into. But the bottom line is, I was told at 3:30 on Friday after, 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon, that I'd have to report next morning 7 o'clock to be inducted into the Army.
Wow.
Drafted. And I had been fighting it. Judges been fighting it. Judge went on vacation. So I went in a very difficult time in my life, and I prayed. I got a basic training at Fort Ord, sent to Fort Benning, and I just prayed earnestly that God would provide me one Christian friend. And I used to tack on the end of the prayer, and Lord, if possible, I'd like them to have wheels.
Yeah.
So get around. And I was a long time before they deployed me to my station, and I actually was assigned to an Esprit office of military intelligence.
Right.
As a private. There was a German kid, Hans, who had been the Italian artist and was getting out of the service. So they asked me if I knew anything about art, and I had drafting experience. So I said, sure. And I ended up working for a colonel the whole time I was in there. I was kind of protected and had a wonderful time. But I was only in there, I think, my second day, and a big master sergeant came into my office. I had a private office. And he said, Bob, and I introduced myself, I'm Jim. And he says, I go to a Bible study on Thursday evenings every week. Would you like to tag along? And when I said I'd love to, he about fell off his feet and he about fell over. Anyway, I went there and there were a bunch of whacks there. But more importantly, there was this guy from Omaha, Nebraska that had a brand new Pontiac, full-size Pontiac hardtop. And we became best friends, and later a third Christian. And we were so good, he had this new Pontiac. When he'd go on leave, he'd give me the keys, here's my car. And so God answered my prayer far above what I could possibly imagine.
Wow, that's wonderful.
You know, I've been through tough times since, but it's amazing how God works in our lives.
Wow, it is, definitely.
I probably told you too much about myself.
Well, that's okay. So how many books have you wrote? How many books have you written so far?
Well, I wrote, I think 3 or 4 printed books. This was a number of years ago. And more recently, I got into ebooks.
Okay.
I've got 7 ebooks out now. Some of them are revised, updated versions of the print books. Some of them are brand new. I got a bunch more that are entirely new. And it's just one more way I think God used. I also have a blog on the internet that's been going for many years now, daily blog.
Okay.
Read it in almost 200 countries, translated in over 100 languages.
Wow.
And so you don't get many comments anymore. When I first started blogging, you did. But I got a comment one time from a Muslim guy, and he said, I want to know more about this God of yours. How do I get to know this God? So we corresponded back and forth. I had other comments like a Buddhist and stuff. So God works in amazing ways.
Sure does, yeah.
Let him work. And if we try to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Plug in my computer here. So yeah, you've got quite a ministry, I understand.
Yeah, my original plan wasn't to be a pastor. My original plan was to rock the world, you know.
Right.
I fell in love with the guitar at the age of 10, and I spent a whole lot of years composing, writing music, but I never broke through. I mean, I had a couple pretty good underground songs, but I never broke through. And then right around 1990, when I went back into the military, because I joined the Marine Corps in 1979, right after high school. Got out the Marine Corps, you know, just kind of like did a little bit of nothing. I got saved in 1975 now, and I went back in the military in '87, and they gave me 3 options because I was a prior Marine and really didn't have to go to boot camp anymore. So they gave me 3 options: mechanized infantry. I said nope. MPs. I said nope. The third one was a carpenter masonry specialist. I said, that sounds like a pretty good job. So I ended up, going into that MOS. I got stationed at Fort Meade. And at Fort Meade, God made it quite clear to me that he wanted me to go into ministry. But I didn't want no part of that because I still wanted to rock the world. I still played my guitar 2 or 3 hours after duty every single day. And was still writing a boatload of music, and then push came to the shove. I ended up involved in ministry because I went to seminary school. It was an unaccredited seminary school back in 1991, and then later on I went to Liberty University about 12 years later, and then started having Bible studies all over the place. I did a couple of ministries, a couple of Bible studies, a couple of house Bible studies, and then I was about to get a church last year. COVID-19 took off, and I said, well, let me put that on hold because there's no sense in putting people in harm's way, you know.
Right.
And then I just started devoting everything to my online ministry, which has still been floating around for a while. So I just started putting more attention to it. But the thing about it, all through my me devoting time to music online, I never really stopped. Well, when I realized I had to go to ministry one day, I slowly but surely started putting up, gospel stuff and forming my online ministry and things of that nature. Well, and right now, the funny thing that happened, this is not actually funny, but about 1.5 years ago, I got diagnosed with prostate cancer. And during the process, I started uploading a boatload of sermons. I just started doing sermons every single week. And I said, Lord, regardless of this prostate cancer, you're sovereign. And, I'm just going to keep on putting my trust in you. I'm going to devote my time to uploading sermons and just submerging myself in your word and learning more and more and more about the Bible, because you never really learn everything about the Bible. You just got to keep on studying, and God keeps on revealing stuff to you. Even though you've read chapter 3 or 4 times, you read it again and you go, how did I miss that?
50 times and you come back and you see something new.
And see something new, exactly. So that's where I'm at now. I got like 3 podcasts, Eternal Word podcast, Clergy Talk podcast, and a YouTube page, and then my Facebook pages. And I got about 2 or 3 groups I'm running, a biblical archaeology group, a group called United in Christ, and a couple other groups I haven't devoted any time to yet that I need to start devoting more time to. But I got a lot of stuff going on in the name of the Lord for His glory.
That's great. How's your cancer now? Are you under control?
Everything's under control now. They just do like preventive marriage treatments. That's all. Just keep everything at bay. You know, just make sure it doesn't come back. And I get a X-ray done every couple of months, and every now and then they'll come and take some blood and stuff, and just they keep an eye on me, make sure everything's good. But when they first diagnosed me, the doctor was giving me a look like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, I'm not receiving that. I'm gonna put this in the hands of the Lord.
Right. But the Lord knows our days before we're born.
Exactly. I believe that 100%. Yeah. So the book I was interested in was that story about the missionary.
Cancer.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh. Well, the way this came about, I mentioned I grew up in poverty. My dad was killed when I was a year old.
Oh, wow.
In an industrial accident during World War II. And my mom, I was just exactly 1 year old, and an older brother and sister. So we didn't have much. And eventually my mom, 8 years later, remarried. I really believe she remarried to provide a father for our kids more than she did.
Right,
anyway,
right.
The guy she remarried was, I think, good intention, but he was no way equipped to be a father. Example, he was a championship swimmer, but he never lifted a finger to teach his kids how to swim.
Oh, man.
It is one example. His whole life, he never once told me he loved me or anything, hugged me or anything like that. We basically moved from Canada, where we were, to Portland, Oregon. And we were basically, in those days, didn't call that, but we were a homeless family. We didn't know where we were going. He didn't have a job. We had a contact name in Portland, which was the Elliots.
Okay.
We actually lived in the home with Jim Elliot and his parents and some of his siblings were there at the time for about 6 weeks. Jim was my Sunday school teacher, and I remember it was a going away party. And make a long story short, we eventually settled in Portland. Years later, we'd become, Fred, Jim's dad, became a spiritual mentor to me. He took me on as a project.
Okay, good.
One of several. In fact, as I look back in my life, I realized God has provided a godly man in my life. But every decade it changed throughout my life. Like God has always provided the father I never had in somebody else. Years after both Jim and his dad Fred had died, we were over at Clara, his mom's house, and we were picking apples off her tree for her because she was obviously too old and unable to do that. Afterwards, we had lunch in her nook. And she, one time, she said to me, she says, you know, Bob, I wish I could hear Jim's voice again. I said, sure, Clara, sure, so would I. A little while later, Bob, I wish I could hear Jim's voice again. Well, this happened about 4 times. And I thought, there's got to be something behind this. So I started probing. She says, well, her husband, Fred, had recorded Jim a number of times when he spoke locally, both to grade school kids and also to adults. And there's an old wire recorder. I don't know if you're familiar with wire recorders, but there's a forerunner of tape machines.
Okay.
Stainless steel wire. Fidelity was never good when they were new. The wires broke a lot, so you tie a knot in it. We found the old machine, which hadn't worked in years, and a box full of recordings. And I took it, and after I worked in the electronics industry at the time, after a while I was able to make it work enough that I could put a cassette jack on the back so I could play recordings and transfer to cassette tape.
Wow. Okay.
And so I did that and gave the copies to Clara. She was so happy to hear Jim's voice again. A year or two later after that, we're over to see her one time, and she said, dropped the machine out and all. She said, Bob, I want you to have these because I know you'd appreciate them. So I took them, and sometime after Clara died, I thought, the world ought to be able to hear these. Well, the recordings fidelity was so bad, plus all the breaks in the wire. It wasn't good when it was new. So we decided to try to transcribe them, my wife and I. And there were some individual words that literally we would spend 20 minutes on one word trying to decipher what it was in context and what the voice was and so forth. But eventually we did that for recorded messages. We found 4 of Jim's voice, recorded them. I put them in the print book called Jim Elliot, A Christian Martyr Speaks to You. They're fabulous words. But then more recently, we found 2 more in that box of collection, and we added 2 more and put it into an ebook. And so now the ebook has 6 of Jim's messages. It's available online, Amazon or anywhere else people buy ebooks. And they're very interesting recordings. If you like old time, deep theological preaching, you'd love it. Jim was an amazing guy. The backstory, as probably you're well aware, Jim and 4 of his associate missionaries spent months and months preparing to reach this unreached tribe.
Right.
We developed a unique system of the pilot. Nate Saint developed a system where he could circle in a circle and have a bucket stay stationary near the ground. They could drop trinkets to these basically man-killing savage tribes.
Right.
And they got to where they started sending gifts back.
Okay.
So they really felt they had made some, and they prayed a lot and they worked a lot and continued on this, and they decided one day to land and go in there. Well, what they didn't know at the time, one of the young girls in the tribe, when they landed, lied to the tribal leaders about these guys, and so they came out and speared them all to death. It wasn't until years later that it was determined they had loaded pistols with them, but they had decided beforehand that since they were going to heaven and these unreached people were not, they would not use pistols against them. So
Okay.
they gave up their lives. And the continuing story is later, virtually the entire tribe came to know Jesus Christ. And one of their leaders actually came to the U.S. and was amazed to see modern society and so forth. But their lives were lost. People said it was a tragedy, it was a waste of time, foolish missions. It was a big write-up in those days. Life magazine had devoted a whole issue to it. It was on every major news network day after day.
Right.
It was a big issue in those days. But people said it was a waste of time and all that. But you look back at it, literally hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of people dedicated their lives to Christ as a result of that.
Right.
And many others who were already Christians decided to go full-time service. So at that time, it was January 1956, if I remember right, early in 1956. Since that time, especially in the decade following it, the Lord used it in so many people's lives, and it's still, some of his sayings are still well known, like he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. One of the best books about Jim Elliot, in my opinion, for those who like theology and deeper things, is the Journals of Jim Elliot, written or edited by his wife Elizabeth, and it has a lot of wonderful quotes in there that aren't well known. One of my favorite is, "Forgive me for being so ordinary while claiming to know such an extraordinary God." It's an amazing. He was an amazing man. He went to in Portland, Oregon. They used to have, well, it's still there, but it's not the same school. We used to have a school called Benson Polytechnic High School. This was a boys-only school. They called it the nation's finest technical school. I don't know if it was or not, but when I went there, Jim was a wrestling champion, and he was also student body president of that school, even though he was a Christian.
Right.
When I was there, they accepted 675 of us as freshmen. We only graduated 288. The rest of them
Wow.
went back to their local high schools because it was a free
Wow.
to go to that school. We had all kinds of equipment. We had a nuclear reactor. We had our own FM radio station, stuff that high schools just didn't have. Even
That's amazing.
yeah, it was amazing. But anyway, Jim, the reason I point this out is it was an amazing school. Yet even as a Christian, Jim was a leader in the secular school where he was president of the student body. Anyway, that digresses. But that's how I came upon the recordings and transcribed them, published them, and I get comments from time to time. People, I had a friend, personal friend, who recently read the book and just came back, star-eyed, saying, "I can't believe the depth of theology." Well, Jim was an amazing guy. He knew Greek and he knew Hebrew, English. He was a very intelligent young man.
Mm.
And the whole Elliott family, I should maybe digress, the whole Elliott family loved the Lord. Jim was the oldest of the siblings, was Bob Elliott. He was actually a gifted preacher and officiated at my wife and I's wedding some years ago. The next in line was Herbert Elliott, whose actual name, Bert Elliott, we knew him as. His actual name was Herbert Ironside Elliott. Ironside was chosen because Harry Ironside had been instrumental in his dad's salvation. The next one was Jim Elliott. Now, Bert Elliott had been in the fields in Ecuador, missionary field, since before Jim ever even thought of going.
Wow.
Many years. He and his wife spent they were childless. They spent their entire life in Ecuador.
That had to be challenging.
It was. And first it was in the jungles, and then they got a boat and they did the river and river people. Then they got up in the high mountains and then the coastal line. They established churches all over Ecuador.
Oh, wow.
Then next in line after Bob and Bert was Jim. And he became, so the three brothers were very heavily involved in Christian ministry their whole lives. And then they had a younger sister, Jane. Jane was married a professor at Wheaton College. So the entire family spent their lives ministering for God. So it's quite a family and quite a history. To give you an idea how they loved everybody. My wife was vacuuming one day, years later, and the phone rang. And it was Clara Elliott, Jim's mom. And she was almost was in tears at everyone. And Connie asked her, what's going on? She said, well, my Betty's husband died. He was talking about Betty Elizabeth Elliott, Jim's widow, had remarried, and then her second marriage, her husband died. And Clara was in tears over this loss.
Wow, yeah.
They were a loving family. They lived not far from Multnomah Bible School in Portland. They almost always had at least one student living in their home while they were going to school.
Okay.
Typically free of charge. They were just giving people, the whole family. But anyway, that's how I got hold of the books, and how I wrote recordings, and they put them in both print. And the print book has 4 messages. The audio, or ebook, I should say, has 6 messages in, and they're all outstanding.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I know they had a recent tragedy happened that a few years back, where some other missionaries tried to reach this unreached tribe, and they ended up actually showing them being martyred on television.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
It's been about maybe about 10 years ago.
My memory's failing me at this point.
Right. But I vaguely remember that myself as well, because I remember it was on the news everywhere. But I came across his name when I actually had a class on missionaries.
Right.
And they actually brought him up as a reference.
Right.
And then when I saw your books, I said, okay, we got somebody that knows a lot of the inside stuff that's going on there, which is always good to share that information with other Christians, right. just so they can see the glory of God and how God works and how God can transform people regardless of where they are.
Right. Let me give you a quick idea of what's in the ebook. The first message, well, first there's an explanation, and I go back to the background. But then there's on spiritual warfare. he has two different messages. These were given to, I think, junior high or high school students. The first one's called Spiritual Desire, what it is, how to get it, and how to maintain, so forth. Second one is the effects of sin in the Christian.
Yeah.
People need to understand the effects of sin. And then the next three messages are on Jesus Christ. One is called God's Prophet, and he traces from Adam all the way through history how God has always had his representative voice on earth, with, of course, Christ being the final and great prophet. And then the second one is on the feeding of the multitudes. And, you know, we oftentimes, when we talk about miracles, people don't talk about the miracle of multiplying food. But it's a fantastic miracle. But he has very interesting insights on that. And then the third one on Jesus Christ is the resurrection, all about the resurrection of Christ. And these are deep messages. These aren't fluff. And then he also, the final message in here, Peter, the disciple, about his life. And I think most of us identify with Peter in many ways. And it's another excellent message. And because of the era and because of his depth, they're quite different from what we hear in messages today.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, Peter was definitely an interesting character when you study him and when you look at his the way God used him.
Right.
And his earthly body saying, Lord, I'm going to stand with you to the bitter end, and not understanding the prophecy said that Jesus Christ would do this by himself.
Right.
And when you look at all that and you see how God restores Peter and puts him in position before he ascends up, and then when you think about Peter and we think about our own shortcomings, I think that's one of the reasons why so many people relate to Peter.
I think that's right. And if you look through Scripture, most, not all, most of the people God has used mightily, not just in Scripture, but since the Scriptures are written, most of the people God has really used have been really down in their life at one point or another.
Yeah.
I think that's because unless you realize the great mercy that God has given you and how unworthy you are, it's pretty hard to stay humble enough for God to use you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I one of my future books is on pride and humility. I jokingly say I'm going to write a book on humility and how you too can obtain it. But in reality, there's nothing worse than pride. And
exactly.
I believe in God's eyes, spiritual pride's got to be worst of all.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
I think one of the biggest mistakes I made early when I started getting serious about training for the ministry, I figured if I just understood all the theology and could teach scripture, I would be okay.
Right.
But it's far more than that. You have to really, it's about relationship building and caring about the people who are coming to hear the word and finding out what's going on in their everyday lives as well. It's not just teaching them scripture, which is important, but when you think about how Jesus Christ embraced all these different people with all these different problems, and you saw his compassion and his empathy and him just pouring himself out. And it took me a long time to learn that I had to learn how to pour myself out to the ministry and actually embrace people and just, you know,
right,
just be an ear to people sometimes. I thought all I had to do was get the theology part right and I'd be good to go. But when I finally learned that lesson, I said, wow, I did a whole lot of things wrong in my early Bible studies. But like I said, God has a way of teaching his people, and he did a number on me till I got it right.
Well, the thing is, God values service more than he does all these other things.
True.
He's not so interested in were you a great pastor, were you a great preacher, were you a great this or that. He's interested in were you a great servant.
Yes, yeah.
That's what he values.
Exactly.
And you know, I tell people when they ask about the writing success and that type of thing, I say, you know, I don't worry about that. I write for an audience of one.
Right.
I write for God, what God put on my heart. And if nobody ever reads it, if that's what God told me to write, I'm happy. And if one person reads it and it affects them for eternity, that's worth it all. You know, so many people are interested in sales and all the rest of it. I feel the same way about my blog. I don't look for masses. I mean, obviously it'd be nice to have masses if that's translated into eternal good. But the big thing is I got to write what God is putting on my heart.
Right.
Leave results with him.
Right.
That's
Yeah, and when we consider the fact that Jesus washed the feet of the apostles,
right.
that tells us our role in the big picture.
Right. He washed the feet of Judas,
Yep, him as well.
and he knew who he was, what he was going to do.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, when I look at it with my human eyes, I say to myself, I wouldn't do that. But when you look at it with your spiritual eyes, you say, well, you know, you kind of understand the
Right.
big picture.
And you have to get to a maturity point where you realize whatever you have, whatever skills, whatever gifts, natural abilities or spiritual gifts, is all a grace gift from God. So there's absolutely no way in looking down on others.
Right.
Everything you have is a gift from God. And it's so easy in our human pride to lose that.
That's true.
We've done so.
That's true. Because I thought all my gifts he gave me was for me to become a musical star. It
Right.
wasn't for that at all. The
Right.
gifts he gave me was for me to go into ministry and use those gifts to be self-contained in putting my ministry together, auditing my, you know, my sermons, auditing my interviews, auditing my lectures, and it all came together instead of me thinking that I got this charisma to be a rock star on stage and not being afraid to stand up in front of people. It wasn't for that at all. It was a gift to be given to step on that platform and say, "Thus saith the Lord." You know, that was what it was all for. And when I finally realized that, I started sleeping much better at night.
You have to get to a certain maturity level before you realize that all these difficult things that you say, why did this happen? God uses to weave through your life to make you who you are.
I believe that.
Yep. And even the most difficult things, I look back and now I realize they're helpful to me. If nothing else, you can identify with other people going through difficult things. But it's much
Exactly.
more.
Exactly. I believe that 100%, because when people start sharing testimonies, you find that sometimes your testimony helps somebody that's going through that same thing right now.
Right.
Yeah.
People need to know that no matter how bad things are, they'll very likely get better over time in most cases. You just have to be faithful.
Exactly. So what are some of the other topics you have covered in your books?
Well, there's many. I don't know if I can show these, but there's a whole list of.
Okay.
But I think my personal favorite. I studied when I was in engineering in high tech before I became a management consultant. I was assigned to become the engineering manager of a camera department in a Fortune 500 company. And I had an engineering background, but I didn't know hardly anything about light. So I started studying light. And a good manager doesn't have to know all the ins and outs, technicalities of people he leads.
Right.
The more I studied light, the phrase God is light from 1 John 1:5 struck me. And I began to realize that there are tremendous parallels between the attributes of physical light and the attributes of God, or Christ, I should say. And so I wrote a book on it. It's received rave reviews from Dr. Earl Rodmacher, who for many years was president of Western Seminary. He was also the general editor of the New King James Study Bible. He said that Tozer had taken this far, and Packer had taken this further in the attributes of God, but now Russell was taking this further.
Wow.
So that's quite a quote. That book is probably my favorite topic, and it shows analogies. When I was a management consultant for 30 some years, I think I succeeded because of my ability to see through complex topics and reduce it to simple concepts. Well, these analogies are that way. The second one I wrote, or actually the first in that series, was God's Church, Christ's Pearl, on the parable of the precious pearl, one precious pearl. Many people, there's three main interpretations and a number of others, but the one that I really hold to is that it's a picture of the church. And so in this particular book, I first go through the three main interpretations and why I reject them. And then the rest of the book is parallels between the pearl and the church.
Okay.
Again, it received great reviews. The third one in that series of analogies is God's child like a tree, which is Psalm 1:3, basically, about you'll be like a tree planted by the waters. Uh,
Right.
Dr. Ron Allen, who for many years was in the theology department at Dallas Seminary, is recently retired and was a nationally recognized expert on the Psalms, said that was the definitive work on Psalm 1.
Hmm.
Well, again, another good quote. And of course, the Jim Elliot book. Those were what I call my Christian Concepts series, those three books. And then the next three were what I call Christian Growth series. One is God's Desire, how to please God. And basically, I developed two graphic models. First, I have a very short overview of the three main, for lack of better description, types of God's will. And when the Bible types of God's will, it's not always talking about the same thing. So clarify the differences. But then I have developed two graphic models, one showing God's will for every Christian and how to build this graphic model showing how to live the Christian life successfully. And then the second one is how to make, if you get that one down, how to make godly decisions. So three graphic model on decision making. And then the second one in that series on Christian growth, I call God's Light, How to Respond. It's basically application of what we learned in the other book about sunlight, parallels between how physical objects react to sun rays from the sun and how human beings react to light from God. And then the third one, which actually I'm fighting Amazon right now, it's been out for over a month, but Amazon's refusing to publish it. Just got another email today saying they're trying to clarify and get it up, but for some reason they've got some internal squabbles.
Right.
People don't like the content. But anyway, it's Christ's Disciple, How to Finish Strong. And I use a pyramid of 7 steps of understanding how to grow consistently and maintain consistency. And if you fail, how to pick up the next rung on these 7 steps. And basically, obviously, the foundation is making a decision for Christ, but the next thing is making daily decisions for Christ. And then it moves on up to your thought process, your attitudes, and so forth, motivations, lifestyle, etc. To eventually finish strong. And that's a real practical guide for Christians who feel like they're not moving forward in a particular way. So those are the 7 that I have out right now, ebooks. Next one's going to be on Christ's blood. It'll be coming out before too long. And after that, probably one I mentioned earlier on pride versus humility. I got a bunch more in the works, but those 7 are out currently. They're available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, all the major ebook retailers.
Well, I'll make sure I got all those links under this when I put this out later on today. Now, I heard a sermon about a guy, I don't know who the speaker was, but he was taking light about the book that you wrote about, and he was comparing it to God, and he was getting real heavy with physics and all that, and so on and so forth. I think I listened to it once or twice, but it never stayed with me.
Well, I think that's one of God's gifts to me, is the ability to simplify things into everyday language. In the one about God's light, comparing sunlight to sunlight, S-O-N-U and the attributes of the two. The only formula you find in there by mention is E equals MC squared. Everybody's heard it. But I avoid the technical talk.
Yeah.
I just explain it in everyday terms. And it's, I had when I first had the book, before I had it published, I had some optics and light specialists review it, weren't necessarily Christians. And one of the optics experts that was reading wrote to me, and he says, Bob, he says, I'm getting so fascinated with this, I'm having trouble reviewing it for accuracy. I get lost in the analogies and enjoying it so much. But, they did review it. And, the thing is, if there's anything we take for granted in our physical world, it's light.
Yeah.
There was a professor in one of the big name schools years ago who every year his last assignment to his class was, I'm going to leave a room and I want you to write down everything you find in this room. And he did that for years and years. And at his retirement, somebody asked him, Professor, why did you always use that same thing? He says, well, nobody ever listed everything. They said, what do you mean? He said, nobody ever once mentioned light in the room. And, it's something we take for so granted.
Yeah.
We don't give it a second thought. And that in itself is almost a parallel to, God. We take everything he gives us for granted. If it's a lightning strike or a flood, we call it an act of God. But if it's warm breezes and gentle sunshine, we say it's Mother Nature.
Right.
Anyway, there's so many parallels between spiritual light and natural physical light. So that's really my own personal favorite. I started that book back in 1980.
Okay.
First doing it on a yellow tablet with a pen, later transferring it to a typewriter.
Wow.
Years later, a computer, and eventually editing it and changing it and editing it, and eventually published it print, and then now in ebook. So, but if anybody's interested in that, you can go on Amazon anywhere and just look up the author name, Robert Lloyd Russell.
Okay.
You'll find all my books. Or you can go to Barnes and Noble, somewhere else. But it's Robert Lloyd with 2 L's and Russell with 2 S's and 2 L's.
Wow, that's fascinating, because that was actually, I had like 2 or 3 loves growing up as a child.
Yeah.
One was being a writer,
Mm-hmm.
didn't pursue that much. Other was be a musician, and the other one was to retire in the military.
Uh-huh.
Well, I joined the Marine Corps. I said, I think I'll become a musician. Got out of there. And I wrote a couple of things. I've been working on the same book for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years.
Hard
This
work.
project actually came to mind when I was going through my chemo treatment and all that. So I probably need to get back to that as well. But writing's definitely a chore that I know takes a lot of concentration, focus, and research and discipline, and you got to put the time in it.
It is a big thing. The last first thing I'd ever thought I'd be is a writer. One subject in school I didn't enjoy was English and history, I guess. But God has his ways. An easier way for people to find my books if they want is just RLR, which is Robert Lloyd Russell, RLR, www. RLR books. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm mixing my email. Booksrlr.com.
Well, I'll definitely post up all those links, but once I post this, I'll have all the links up there.
Yeah, just booksrlr.com. You can find all my books there. I think if somebody wants to sign, not interested in the book, but would like to get my monthly author newsletter, there's also a link there. I just send out a little bit of updates to people, and usually some humor and whatever else mixed in, and links. So it's like I say, they get a freebie if they sign up for a newsletter. You'll appreciate this, in the military, my first thing I ever wrote was when I was in the military. It was a short little article, which was published in a magazine called At Ease, which is published for military families. And it was about the uniqueness of the patch of the U.S. Army Infantry Center,
Yep.
which is probably as basic as you can get in any military force, and how it relates to God. And that was published in 1964, I think. I give that away now for signing up to my newsletter.
Wow.
So,
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I always ask all my guests the same question. What's your favorite book of the Bible?
Ecclesiastes. It's surprisingly, when I was a young Christian, it was one of maybe the 3rd or 4th book I really got into. The thing I love about Ecclesiastes is it's so down to earth, practical, and it's the life experience not only of Solomon, but anybody who matures in Christ. You realize, I had a saying when my wife and I were dating, she thought it was humorous. Now she's come to appreciate it. It's to say, anticipation is better than realization. You plan on a vacation and so excited about it, and yeah, it's good, but it's no better than the anticipation. And you get a new car, you think, oh, it's a wonderful thing, but in a couple of months, this will say. Solomon went after this and went after that, seeking pleasure. And in the end, he says, the whole purpose and enjoyment of life is to worship God. And,
Yeah, that's definitely agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and coming from the wisest man in the world, at least at that time, probably ever, that's pretty good advice.
Yeah.
What's more important in the long run than preparing for eternity? Dr. Earl Rodmacher, I mentioned earlier, he used to have a saying, life on earth is preparation for reigning time. Our whole purpose in life is to prepare ourselves for being with God and for reigning with Him. And if we lose sight of that, we can waste our time on so many other things. So anyway,
I agree.
favorite book.
I agree with that 100%, because when I reflect on some of the things I've done in the past, and I said to myself, if I was just more motivated about reading the Bible and serving the Lord, some of the mistakes I made yesterday, I probably wouldn't have made them.
Yeah, I love what Charles Spurgeon said. He's one of my favorites of the old timers. He said, read many books, but live in the Bible.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's easy to spend so much time reading books about the Bible, you don't read the Bible.
Yeah.
It's
that's definitely true. Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, it's real easy to get trapped into that. And good things can come between you and your relationship with God. Years ago, I have two daughters and, of course, a wife. Years ago, I got into model trains, HO, and I built this super layout. And this was before the days of current electronics and stuff. And I figured out a way that we could run 4 trains. We each had our own train. We run them all on the same tracks independently, together at different times. And it was a fascinating little project. But I found that pretty soon I was spending all my time on that train and the trains. And we all had 4 control boxes. We had trolley in the city center. And finally I realized, there's nothing wrong with this. It's just that it's taking all my time. I'm not spending time for work. So I got rid of the whole works. Sold it for pennies on the dollar because. And I think it's easy. It can be a sport, it can be golf, it can be fishing, it can be all kinds of things. They're not bad in themselves, but if they take you away from time and the Lord, then they're not right for you.
That's true.
And,
that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem I had when I was involved in music. I would play the guitar 4 or 5 hours a day, every single day, and that's all I thought about it.
Right.
And as God started, bringing me nearer and nearer to Him, I started realizing me playing the guitar wasn't half as important as me learning about God.
And learning how to serve Him. I mentioned earlier the Christian Servicemen's Home we started. It's interesting. We used to go out in town on the weekends, especially handing out little business cards to soldiers saying, come over here and give me the address to Christian Servicemen's Home. We'll give you a free meal and so forth like that. We get guys in, and then during the meal, we'd have short testimonies and a little bit of Bible study or something like that. And a lot of guys come to know Christ. Well, I was out and I was handing cards out one time, and this wino came up to me, drunk. We used to call them winos in those days. I was put off. I wanted to avoid him, but I couldn't. So I gave him a card to come for dinner. He came.
Okay.
He accepted Christ. I started, for a couple nights in a row, I would meet with him. But the second night I met with him, I'd never said anything to him, but he says, Bob, I poured it out. I poured it out. I said, what are you talking about? You poured it out. I poured it out. He says, I took all my booze, my liquor, and I poured it down the drain.
Wow.
He says, I quit smoking. I didn't say anything to him about smoking. I didn't say anything to him about drinking. He got rid of it all just by reading the Bible after he'd come to know Christ. He just radically changed. About a week later, a week after he became a Christian, I met with him again. I was trying to disciple him a little bit. He says, Bob, I'm leaving. I'm going back to my hometown in Virginia. I said, what's up? He says, well, Bob, I hadn't told you this, but I was an executive in a Fortune 500 company. I committed adultery with my wife, lost my family. I murdered a guy. I did a bunch of stuff. And he says, I'm going back to turn myself into the authorities.
Wow.
James Barbie. I prayed for him ever since. He was older than I, so I'm sure he's gone by now to heaven. But I prayed for him ever since. That guy. How God can just take a guy and immediately put the Spirit of God in him in a way that he knows what he needs to do differently.
True.
And even to the point of going back and turning himself in for a murder charge.
Wow.
Amazing guy.
Wow.
You never know how God can use you. And sometimes it's like that situation. I didn't want to be used when he first came up to me. I wanted to avoid him. But God had better plans. I had another young soldier, a guy, Rosenthal, James Rosenthal, and he accepted Christ, a young Jewish man. I think he was only like 18, 19. After he accepted Christ, a couple weeks later, he told me, he said, my parents, my family have totally disowned me. They even held a funeral for me. They considered me dead. But he went on to be, to study love the Lord. And as far as I know, he's still going on. So God can do miraculous things in people. I guess that's the overall message, is that no matter what state, condition a person's in, God can turn your life around.
I agree.
Even if it's not physically better, your internal being will be 1,000% better.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I keep hearing testimonies from Christians that's been through 10 times more than I've been through.
Yeah.
And I got to keep giving all the glory and praise to God, because who we can't reach, he can reach. And that's just so beautiful, to see God take somebody's life and just completely turn it around. That's just amazing.
Yeah. And I don't want to sound overly political, but I get a kick out of a congressman or all our politicians, whether Democrat or Republican. The answer to every problem is either more money or more education. Because we don't understand the basic depravity of man, and they don't understand what education is important. In the old days, we taught Bible in schools. Today, we're from prayer out of schools. It's the type of education, and it's the fact that money doesn't solve things. It's man's heart that has to change, and only Jesus Christ can do that. Yeah,
because we're living in an unchurched world now.
That's right.
It's not like it used to be. The way it used to be, you had to go to church,
right?
And there was no debate about it. You're going to church. Right. Now, church is not even important anymore for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's going to be. I think we're in for some interesting days for Christian people in the days ahead in this country. God knows, and the church, the true church, always flourishes during hard times.
I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, before we end this episode, what kind of advice can you give my audience right now?
I would just say keep looking up. Fred Elliott, Jim's father, he was such a great mentor to me. But I can see his face right now. Whenever we would part, he'd always say, "Well, Bob, I'll see you here, there, or in the air." And it was just, a way of reminding yourself of the truth of who you are in Christ. And I think that's the thing the Christian always has to do, is keep focused. Nebuchadnezzar said, when he was almost insane, he said, "I looked into the heavens and my sanity was restored."
Wow, yeah.
And I think that's the thing, focus on Christ. I've heard, as you have, some Christian leaders that have fallen disgracefully. But that's why we should never focus on a pastor or a Christian leader. Focus on Christ. Every one of us has got two natures. Every one of us is a believer. We've got both the old nature and the new nature. And focus on Christ and you won't go wrong. That'd be my advice.
That's definitely some good. Yeah, that's definitely some good advice, because men will fall and men will make mistakes, but Jesus Christ will not fall.
That's right. And I've known of pastors who a bad thing happened and they gave up the ministry and even gave up going to church. Their focus wasn't on Christ. Christ will never fail. So that's my advice. Always focus on Christ. Every morning when I get up, I thank the Lord for another day and ask that He'll guide me in how I can serve Him today. And it's oftentimes different than I expect. I'm also a Gideon, and people put Bibles in hotel rooms and all kinds of military everywhere else. I had the distinct pleasure. When we were down in Georgia, I mentioned took my wife down to see Fort Benning, and we found Citizens Home still there. It's changed names and changed locations. But while we were down there in Georgia, we went to Jimmy Carter's Sunday school class.
Okay.
He's an amazing man. He's a more greater depth than I really anticipated spiritually. But anyway, make a long story short, 1,300 people, if you count the overflow room. He picked me out to open in prayer for Sunday school class because I was the only Gideon in the room.
Wow.
So anyway, that's what he thought about the Gideons.
That's amazing.
Regardless what you think of his politics, he's a real man of God.
That's definitely amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an honor having you on Clergy Talk Podcast, and I'm definitely going to get those links to your books at this posting when I post everything up.
Yeah.
And with that being...
The two probably that are most important would be the www.booksrlr.com, where you can put the UPS in there in front if you want. And the other one would be, if you're interested in my blog, Well, actually, that's on that same site, so they could go to my blog there too. So, but that one will take them everywhere. They can go where they want from there, or they can look up any books they're interested in directly on Amazon or anywhere else.
Definitely, because I'm definitely going to look more in that book about the light, because that's a topic that kind of like has caught my attention right now.
Well, it's a fabulous thing. I have a women's leader in a church, significant sized church, that raved and raved about how she was able to put things in that book to use right away today. She says, "I'm not a very intelligent person, but scientifically and technically, but you made it so clear that she went pages and pages of how much she enjoyed that book." So I would recommend that to somebody who's at least bit interested in science. It shows how scripture and science align.
Wow.
And I really appreciate this opportunity, Pastor, and I've been praying for you since we first came in contact. I'll continue to pray for your ministry for you.
Thank you. I'll keep praying for you and your book projects, and I'm just so blessed to talk to you and have you on my show. With that being said, I hope you have a blessed year, and I'm also going to pray for your ministry and gift of writing.
Thank you very much. And I assume you'll send me a link to when this is up on the...
Give me about an hour and I'll have it up.
That's quick. Okay.
I don't waste no time.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay.
Thank you.